Now, there are a few things that we spoke about previously. We spoke about the Khilafah, the Abbasi Khilafah. And the Abbasi Khilafah, we spoke about how it started, how it initiated, and how it ended up. And one thing that maybe is important to clarify in our history is that when we say that there was a Abbasi Khilafah, even though there was a Khilafah, there was a rule that was overseen by the Abbasid, unfortunately the Muslim world was very much divided. There were different countries, there were different states, there were different rules. The Abbasids' seat of governance was where? Does anybody know where the Abbasids' seat, their capital was? Anybody know? No. Baghdad. It was Baghdad in Iraq. Baghdad was established by the second Abbasi Khalifa al-Mansur, and ever since then the Abbasid always existed in Baghdad, although a few exceptions here and there. Now they were in Baghdad, but at the same time you have in the Andalus, which is current day Spain, you had the Umayyads at one period, and then you had different governors and different kings. You had in the North Africa, you had the Murabitun at one stage, and you had the Idrisin, and then you have the Muwahhidun. And in Egypt, and also extending over to Libya and Tunis, you had the Fatimi. Also, they announced that they were the Khilafah. And the Fatimids were different from the Abbasid in the fact that they were Shia. So they were the Shia rules, as opposed to the Sunni rules of the Abbasid in Iraq. And at the same time, throughout the different areas in the world, there were different states, there were different areas of rule, different sultanates in the area. Last time we also spoke about how during the time of Al-Mu'tasim, one of the sons of Harun al-Rashid, he actually brought in the Turks. And he brought in the Turks as a special guard for him, almost like a Republican guard, or what they call the King's Guard, so to strengthen and to protect him. However, what happened is those Turks, they ended up having a great influence on how things were run in the Khilafah. And gradually, as the Abbasids were under attack from different sides and different opponents, they ended up, the Abbasid ended up making use of the Turks to help them and to support them. And this is where you have somebody called the Seljuq, or the Seljuks, and they came in to support the Abbasids. They still accepted the Abbasi as the Khalifa, but in reality they were their de facto rulers. So they were the people who are ruling that Muslim area in Baghdad and Persia, current day Iran, and the areas which are considered beyond the river. So they were in charge, they were ruling, if you like, but the Abbasids still retained the nominal position and the nominal name. Now, if we want to talk about the Ayyubid rule, we can't really talk about them without talking about something called the Zengi rule. And the Zengis, they came before this, and I'll mention to you how they are and how they all related to the Crusades. So the Muslim empire was ever expanding, trying to find ways to in some areas it was to spread Islam, in some areas it was just a question of obtaining land. Because one thing that you have to understand is that the default position in that time was war. The relationship between countries was war. There wasn't, it wasn't like now today everybody respects the borders and everybody, you can't just go and invade another country. Now in that time everybody was at war with everybody else unless we had a treaty that we're not going to be at war. So even you can see in Europe, you know, England was at war with Scotland, and they were at war with Ireland, and they were at war with France and with Spain, and everybody's attacking everybody else, because it's all about capturing land and gaining wealth for the kings and the princes. So the Muslims, the Seljuqids, were pushing back at the Romans. Does anybody know what the Romans were called at that time? Who were considered the eastern branch of Christianity. So we have the west and east branch of Christianity. Does anybody know what the Romans were called? Beginning with the letter B. Huh? The Byzantines or Al-Byzantinian. So the Byzantine Romans, who famously had the control of which city? Constantinople. So the Byzantines had this control of Constantinople, but they were losing land at the hand of the Seljuqids. So what do? They send a message to the Pope, who represents Western Christianity. So these are Byzantines, they are the Eastern, if you like, the Orthodox Christians. These were the Western. So they send a message to the Pope, Urban II, and they say, you got to help us out. These Muslims, they're just taking over, and they are, you know, even though we are a different branch of Christianity, but we're still Christians in the end of the day. You got to help us out. And these Muslims are just pushing us back, and they're taking over land, and they're taking over Jerusalem, and they are etc. etc. So the Urban II, the Pope, he announces that we have to do something about this. So he sends a decree, and he gives a khutbah. He encourages everybody that, look, these Muslims, these Muhammadans, these are, you know, the fake imposters. They are doing this. You have to come. You have to unite and fight under the name of Christ, under the name of the cross. And so that's when you get the Crusades starting up in the 11th century, and they start to move up. So even though they were all at war with each other, but under the banner of the cross, they all united. The kings of England and France and Spain and Germany, all of them sent their soldiers and armies to go and push back the Muslims who were trying to gain land into Europe. And indeed, what happened is they managed to get a stronghold within the areas, especially in the area which is current day Turkey. So they managed to even formulate, not only did they just go there to fight, they actually went there and settled, and they formed kingdoms. So you had the kingdoms of the Anatolia and Acre, and all these kingdoms were established very much on the border of Syria, Sham and Iraq and so on. Also, what they managed to do as well, as they started to push against the Muslims, they managed to, in 1099, they managed to take over Jerusalem, Al-Qudus. So Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa fell down to the Crusades in 1099 as part of the whole expansion of the Crusades. So they didn't just go there just to take the Quds, but they actually settled in that whole area because they wanted a stronghold to push away the Muslims. Now, during this time, obviously this was a great catastrophe. Part of it was because the Muslims were not united, they were fighting each other. Even though, like I said, there was a khilafah, but different Muslims had their own different, if you like, sultanates. Different. It's almost like somebody had a city, that's it. There will be a governor, they will do their own thing, they have their own army. They might not say we are the Khalifa, they'll still say, okay, the Khalifa is the Abbasi, but they will have their own, if you like, state. Much like what the Muslims are today, you know, divided, and each one has their own country and has their own independence. So during this time, the Seljuqids, they appointed a person called Imaduddin Zenki as one of their commanders and one of their leaders. And Imaduddin, so he was from the Turk origin, he started to work, if you like, or he was a commander under the Seljuq authority. and he was given different tasks. Part of those tasks was to, fight with some of those neighboring Muslims to try and take, to unify. Part of that task was to push away the Crusades as well. So he proved himself to be a very strong commander. But at the same time, because there's internal disputes, so the leader of the Seljuqs, he made him very close to him as a commander, but he was envied by the brother of the Seljuq Sultan. And so you can see this kind of rivalry happens. It's almost like you have a king, and the king has a very close confidant. Now the brother of the king might not like that confidence, so he starts, it's a lot of unfortunate deceptions and things that are happening there. This ended with Imad ad-Din being persecuted and to being pushed away by the brother of the Sultan. But he managed to sort of fled, if you like, and he fled to an area in Iraq, which is an area called Tikrit, which happened to be under the authority of somebody called Najmuddin Ayyub. Najmuddin Ayyub, he was in charge of Tikrit. He brought this guy in, Imad ad-Din. He looked after him, he protected him from those who were conspiring, until he managed to regain, if you like, reaccumulate, regather, and he managed to then reformulate himself. And once the Sultan's brother sort of was out of the picture, he managed to come into the Seljuk authority again, and they actually appointed him to be in charge of northern Iraq, in the area of Mosul, and the area of and that kind of area. There's an area called Sinjar, and where's the Kurdish area, if you like. Najmuddin Ayyub, who was he? He was he was a Kurdish person. He was in that area of Tikrit. He was living there, and he had a brother who was called Shirko, Asaduddin Shirko, and they were in Tikrit. But unfortunately something happened. There was some sort of conspiracy as well, which forced them to be pushed out. And this happened after Najmuddin had a young boy born to him, and that young boy was named is Yusuf Ayyub, but his nickname was Salahuddin. So Salahuddin was the nickname of Yusuf al-Ayyub. And this family, Najmuddin, Shirko, they ended up, because they were conspired in Tikrit, they ended up going to live with Imaduddin Zenki, who previously, not far ago, they had helped him. They had helped him from those who were conspiring. So now the Zenki, Imaduddin Zenki, with Najmuddin Ayyub, they were working together. He appointed Najmuddin as an important commander in the army. Shirko had very good army skills and commanding skills. Najmuddin had a good managerial and authority, political aspects on how to rule and administrative. So they became very good representatives in the Zenki rule now. Okay, so now even though the Khilafah was Abbasi, but the Abbasi Khilafah, as we mentioned last time, gradually started to weaken, and it became very much confined. And now the Zenkis, they had their own, Imaduddin Zenki had his own army, he had his own area, he had his own place, which was northern Iraq, and he started to try and unify with the remaining areas in Syria, Halab, Aleppo, Homs, and etc., and also eventually Damascus as well, because these were like small areas. Everyone was ruling those different areas. So this was like the formation of what's known as the Zenki state, a Zenki state. Now Imad ad-Din, he died, I think he was killed, and he left behind a son who was known as Nur ad-Din Zenki. And Nur ad-Din Zenki was, many people might not be as familiar with that name. How many of you have heard this name, Nur ad-Din Zenki? Nobody? So, okay, one person there. So Nur ad-Din Zenki was actually considered not only very famous ruler, but also a very pious ruler. Some of the Islamic historians, they even rate him high up amongst those who were just rulers. Okay, so he was the son of Imaduddin. Now he is the one who is ruling in that area of northern Iraq. We know the Khulafa al-Rashidin. Yeah. Usually when we say the fifth, who is the fifth of the Khulafa al-Rashidin? Historically, who is the fifth? There's historical, and there is in terms of status and position. So historically, who was the fourth Khulafa? Who was the fourth of the Khulafa? Huh? No. Ali, yes. Come on, this is your history. You need to know this. So we have Abu Bakr radiallahu anh, then we have Umar ibn al-Khattab, then Uthman ibn Affan, then Ali ibn Abi Talib. So those are the four Khulafa. Who came after Ali? Who was the fifth in terms of history? No, before Muawiyah. No. Al-Hasan ibn Ali. Al-Hasan ibn Ali, the son of Ali radiallahu anh. But he only ruled for 6 months. Only ruled for 6 months, and then he stepped down. He stepped down to Muawiyah to consolidate the ummah. Okay, because there was, I don't want to go back. We studied this in a previous lecture. If you go back to the YouTube videos, you can hear that, inshallah. Anyway, the point being is the Khulafa al-Rashidin, historically it was Al-Hasan, but in terms of virtue and piety, they used to say that the fifth of the Khulafa was Umar ibn Abdul Aziz. Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, who came about 60 years later, he was considered like fifth amongst the Khulafa, like his status, his nobility, his justice was like he was one of the Khulafa al-Rashidin. Now Ibn al-Athir says that Zenki, Nuruddin Zenki, is rated after Umar ibn Abdul Aziz. So you have the Khulafa al-Rashidin, then you have Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, then you have Nuruddin Zenki. That's how just he was. That's how a great man he was. He was so just that he established, yeah? No, he didn't. They didn't used to put him in that category. Even though he was a good Khalifa, but he wasn't in that category. So Nuruddin, you will see why Nuruddin Zenki, because Nuruddin Zenki didn't even own a palace. Harun al-Rashid owned a palace. He built a magnificent palace, with the wealth that he had accumulated, to the extent that one day, when he built the palace, where was Harun al-Rashid, the Abbasid Khilafah? Where was he? Which city? Baghdad. Good. So he built a beautiful palace, and people started to come in and they started to congratulate him. But great palace, great structure, great architecture. But then one of the poets entered, and his name was Abu al-Atahiya. He was famous for being a Zahid as well. He said the palace is so great, but it has two major flaws, two major defects in the palace. Harun said, what? Two major, where's the defect? This has spent so much money building. He said, the two defects are that the owner will die and the palace will come to ruins. Yani it will not remain. كل من عليها فان. Nothing will remain in the dunya, isn't it? So Harun al-Rashid cried when he heard this. And it was a big wake-up call. It's like, you spent all this money on this palace, end of the day you're going to die. So that's why Harun al-Rashid isn't probably considered from those. Anyway, Nuruddin Zenki, he established something called Darul Adl, the Justice House or the Justice Institute, where he would sit personally. He was the ruler, but he would personally sit to listen to the people's problems and their complaints. And somebody had a problem with their neighbor, somebody had an issue with his wife, a wife had an issue with her husband, and he would come and listen to them, and he would solve their problems as the ruler. And that's why he was considered of this high status. Anyway, point being, at this time, Salah ad-Din was growing up, and he was mentored by Nuruddin Zenki. So one of the greatest hasanat and good deeds of Nuruddin was that he looked after Salah ad-Din. Salah ad-Din, remember, what was the ethnicity of Salah ad-Din? We mentioned Najmuddin, who is his father. Huh? He was born in Tikrit, which is in Iraq, but he is Kurdish. No, Kurdish. So he's Kurdi from the Kurds. So he was being trained. Now he had a devotion. He wanted to, and indeed he did study. He studied Islamic knowledge. He studied fiqh. He was a Shafi'i in his fiqh. He studied hadith. He memorized the Quran. This is Salahuddin. And so he was very much into the Islamic knowledge. But at the same time, his father and his uncle, Shirko, they pushed him to also getting a military education, so that he was, good on his horse and sword and extra, and also learning from his father administration and so on. So what's happening now? The Crusaders are attacking. They're trying to get as much land. The Muslims are trying to unify, and Nur ad-Din is now in control of North Iraq and most of Syria and that area. Who is in control in Egypt? Who is ruling Egypt? Huh? Sorry? Huh? The Romans? No. The Fatimiyin. And the Fatimiyin were Shia. So they were against the Sunni Khilafah, if you like. Now, or they were opposed to it. But at that time, what happened is the Crusades wanted to attack the Fatimids, to take over Egypt. So they're trying to expand. The more they have a stronghold in the area, the better. So the Fatimids, they reach out to Nur ad-Din Zenki and say, you got to come and help us. Okay? Because these guys are attacking us. You got to give us some reinforcements. So even though the Nur ad-Din was a Sunni, they still reach out. At the end of the day, they are Muslims. We can work together and repel the Crusades. So Nur ad-Din sends his army to help the Fatimids repel the Crusades with the leadership of Shirko, and with him was Salahuddin as well. So they go to Egypt, they help the Fatimids to repel the Crusades, and they managed to do that successfully. But then, while they were there, the Wazir, the minister of the Fatimi Khilafah, was called Al-Adid Billah. He was a bit worried that, now this army, Nur ad-Din Zenki army with Shirko, are there in Egypt, and they are a threat now to the Shi'at Khilafah of the Fatimis. So he then went. This is not the Khalif. This is not the Fatimi Khalifa. This is the minister. Yeah, he goes and then agrees with the Crusades again. So he goes behind the Khalifa to agree with the Crusades to come and fight Shirko and Nur ad-Din Zenki, because he's saying these guys are gonna. They're gonna, they're worrying about this whole thing of the Shia and Sunni. So when they do that, the Fatimi Khalifa saw this as a betrayal. That this guy had betrayed him. You have the Khalifa, and you have this guy who's the minister, the vizier they call him, or wazir in Arabic, the vizier. And he went and conspired with the Crusades to come. And so it ended up basically that the Muslims ended up repelling the Crusades, but also fighting this Fatimi army who wanted to work with the Crusades to repel them. So now the Khalifa, who is Fatimi, his Wazir was a traitor. He ended up executing him and appointing Shirko as the Wazir. So now you have the Shi'at Fatimi Khalifa Al-Adid, and the minister is Shirko. Shirko has the army which has come there, so they are in a stronger position. But Shirko only lasted for about 2 or 3 months, then he died. So in his place was appointed who? Salahuddin. What's his relationship to Shirko? What's Salahuddin's relationship to Shirko? Yes, and his nephew. So Shirko was his uncle. Yeah, Shirko was the brother of Najmuddin Ayyub, and Salahuddin is the son of Najmuddin. So now Salahuddin is the Wazir. Yeah, he has a lot of strength, but he's not the Khalifa. But the Khalifa now is almost like a puppet Khalifa. Not a puppet, but it's almost like just a nominal Khalifa. So Salahuddin now starts to work hard to try and to change the situation in Egypt, because Egypt now had become Shia. Yeah, so he worked hard to do things. So he started, first of all, he got rid of all the Shia judges in the courts and replaced them with Sunni judges. He changed the leaders and the military leaders and things like that, gradually getting rid of all the influence of the Shia in the position. And then Al-Adid Billah, who is still the Khalifa, he died, say natural death. He died on his bed, and when he died, Salahuddin was doing the khutbah, and he was doing khutbah, and in the khutbah, the usual, if you like, etiquette of the khutbah is at the end of the khutbah, they make dua for the Khalifa. So while he was in the khutbah, instead of making dua for the Fatimids, now he made dua for the Abbasi Khalifa. So almost now announcing the end of the Fatimi Khilafah. And that was the end of... So Salahuddin, a lot of us think of Salahuddin and Jerusalem and all that, but actually one of the great achievements of Salahuddin was to end the Shia occupation or rule in Egypt. Because for 250 years, the Fatimids had ruled Egypt and had ruled Libya, that area, North Africa. So anyway, he ended the Khilafah. He announced the dua to the Abbasi Khalifa, even though the Abbasi Khalifa has nothing to do with it. It's just like a picturesque. The guy is there in Baghdad. He is the nominal Khalifa, yeah. But in reality, the Salahuddin has his own leadership. He's still, to a certain extent, attached to the leader in Iraq who sent him. What was his name? The guy who sent him from Iraq, who sent him with his army. No. Nur ad-Din Zenki. Why are you guys forgetting? Because you're not writing. The ulama used to say, قَيِّدُ الْعِلْمِ بِالْكِتَابَةِ. You can guard the knowledge with writing. And now you see, within a matter of few minutes, you've forgotten everything. And then when you walk out of this room, you're going to say, what was that? Your wives will ask you, what did you attend in the masjid? Why didn't you come home after Maghrib? You will say, I don't know, somebody was talking about something in the masjid. I can't even remember what he's talking about. No, I think you will remember it's about history. Oh, is that me? You talk about history, but the names, obviously, I understand. It's not easy. History is difficult. Names, dates, etc. But at least the concepts are there. At least you will go away remembering that Salahuddin ended the Fatima Khilafah in Egypt, the Fatimid Khilafah in Egypt. And then after Nur ad-Din Zenki, he didn't last long after that, and he died after this. So when Nur ad-Din Zenki died, he left his son, who was to be the next ruler of the Zenki state, but his son was like 11 years old or whatever, so he was young. So he wasn't really in a position to rule. So now Salahuddin said, so now Salahuddin announced that that if you like, we are now separated from the Zenki and we have the Ayyubi. Now this is the rise of the Ayyubi rule, the Ayyubi state. Okay, which is where in Egypt. All right. Now at the same time, Salahuddin's focus was still on. By the way, Nur ad-Din Zenki, which I mentioned, he was in Mosul. That was his establishment, and he built a very famous mosque, which is called Masjid al-Nuri. Does anybody have any? Well, maybe you don't. But does anybody know anything? Have anybody heard about the Nuri Mosque in recent history? Probably what they call, some of this trivia. The Nuri Mosque is where the infamous Al-Baghdadi, have you heard of Al-Baghdadi? Abu Bakr Al-Baghdadi. When he made his khutbah for the Khilafah, he did it in a Nuri Mosque in Mosul. ISIS, they took over Mosul, didn't they? So they went and they took this Masjid Nuri, and he made the khutbah there in the Nuri Masjid to say, I'm the new Khalifa, etc. That masjid has a very famous, iconic minaret, which is called Al-Hadba. when it was built by Nur ad-Din Zenki, we've been talking about, he built the masjid. His architect, when he built it, somehow there was maybe some miscalculations. Have you heard of the Leaning Tower of Pisa? Yeah, this was the Hadba. It's called Hadba, means leaning. So the minaret is leaning, but it didn't fall, and it stayed leaning for over. This was built back in the 7th century of Hijrah. So almost 700 years ago, it's built. But when they came to kick out ISIS, they ended up destroying that masjid, and that iconic minaret was demolished. And I went there a couple of years ago. I saw it's quite a shame. It's quite sad to see, such the whole masjid, which was heritage and etc. demolished. But anyway, that was Masjid al-Nur. That was built by Nur ad-Din Zenki. Anyway, going back. So Salah ad-Din now, his purpose was to repel the Crusades. Okay, because these guys they're still forming a threat. But he felt that the best way to do it was that it would be difficult to attack them from Egypt. And the best position to attack them from would be from Sham, which is Syria, where is Damascus and Halab and all that. And this currently was under the Zengi rules. So he had to go and persuade them to come under his role. Obviously they weren't going to be persuaded easily, so there was wars, there was battles, and this was something that Salah ad-Din understood, that I'm not going to be able to defeat the Crusades unless we have a strong Muslim army. If we are separated into different factions and each one has a state here and a city here, we're not going to be able. So he managed to defeat the Zengin armies and unify Syria and Sham with Egypt. So now I had a big strong area. At the same time, in the south of Egypt, what is south of Egypt? Sudan. And what is the area which is south of Egypt? There's a group of people famous living in the south of Egypt. What is their ethnicity? They are known. No, south of Egypt. So between Egypt and Sudan, the Nubiyin, the Nubis. And the Nubis, for some reason, they weren't happy with Salah ad-Din. They wanted to attack Salah ad-Din, and so you can see how these all internal conflicts. But he ended up having to send an army, and so therefore he also defeated them. And so now his rule was not just Egypt, but extending all the way down to Sudan, and also he managed to also take over Yemen. So he was in control of that area, if you like. Now comes the important point, which is that how is he going to defeat these Crusades? These Crusaders were continuously, they were established there. They were continuously trying to get reinforcements. So Salah ad-Din knew that they had a very strong fortification, because what they used to do, they used to build castles, they used to build these fortresses, so it's very difficult to attack. So Salah ad-Din wanted them to come out. So coming out will allow them to bring their armies and their soldiers, and that will make them easier. So what he did, he sent small pockets of armies, small small regiments, to go and if you like, harass or pick a fight, so to speak, with the Crusaders, trying to provoke them. So initially the Crusaders weren't trying to be provoked, but at the end they felt that they've had enough of this skirmishes, so they were going to come out and just defeat this Muslim Ayyubid army. So as they came out to what was known as the plains of Hittin. And this was the area which had a big plain but also had hills. So Salah ad-Din successfully managed to bring them out. Now they knew that Salah ad-Din was there, but it was quite a distance away from their, if you like, area. So the Christian army, the Crusade army, had to march for a little bit. Salah ad-Din positioned some archers on the hills. he also managed to, all the wells, the water wells on the way, he either sort of closed them up, or some historians say that he put poison in them. We don't know, but anyway, he made their access to water restricted. And so what happened is, as the army was coming, they're looking for water, there's no water. They are marching long hours. Remember, these are people, they are Europeans. They're not used to the hot weather. You know, they're coming from cold weather now, and they're in this is the heat of the Middle East. They're marching, they're thirsty. So they were already quite demoralized. Yeah? And so they would be, they would be coming, and they entered into the area, if you like, and the archers were there. So once they entered into the plains of Hittin, they discovered that they're actually enticed into a trap, because they were surrounded now. And so even though there were large armies, tens of thousands of people, they tried to sort of camping there to see how they can deal with the army. But whilst they were doing this, they were also being attacked by the archers. Okay, they were quite demoralized, because now they don't have, the water is reduced. They don't have water. They've obviously been marching for a long time. So a lot of the things were causing them problems. In addition to this, they had something with them called the true cross. The true cross. This was like a relic, is a very important cross. They said, or they thought, or they claimed that this cross had a piece of the cross that they claimed that Jesus was crucified on. Okay, so the initial cross that they claimed Jesus, they had that stuck on a true cross, which was like, for them it was like superstitious, that whenever they had that cross, they would not be defeated. So they had that cross with them. So Salah ad-Din, he wanted to cause more. They were already quite, as you can see, worried, anxious. He sent a focused number of horsemen to try and focus to get that true cross. And indeed, they managed to get it. So when they took the true cross from them, that even demoralized the Crusaders even more, because now their symbol of victory, their good relic, their good luck charm had been taken from them. In addition to all of this, Salah ad-Din noticed that the wind was blowing towards them. So what he did, he burnt some of these trees, some of the trees that were dry. They call it brushwood. So he burnt it. This caused a lot of smoke, and and the wind was blowing towards them. So the smoke all went towards them. So now you can imagine that they're thirsty, they are tired, they've lost their true cross, they're demoralized, and now this smoke is coming towards them. Everything, and the arrows are. So it was just very much overwhelming to them. And when the smoke died down, they found that the Salah ad-Din army now had come down from the hills, and they were on the attack, and khalas, the Crusaders could not repel this attack. They suffered immense defeats at the hands of Salah ad-Din, and some of them had to retreat back to Jerusalem, which was known as the Kingdom of Jerusalem, because it still had the fortified. But Salah ad-Din marched on to it. Now they knew that khalas, they've lost their army, they are demoralized. They said that they can't, they're not going to be able. So the guy at the time, his name was Valiant. He was the leader, or the king, if you like, of the Kingdom of Jerusalem. He offered Salah ad-Din a truce. He said, let's have a deal here. So Salah ad-Din said, no, there's no deal. You're going to have to surrender. You're going to have to. So Valiant said, look, if you don't give us a deal, I swear I'm not going to leave one Muslim alive in Jerusalem, because Jerusalem had still Muslims in it. There's still Muslims living in it, even though it was under the rule of the Crusades. And some say there's about 5,000 or something like that, 5,000 families are there. So he said, I will not leave one single Muslim alive, and I will destroy the masjid, and I'll destroy all the. So either you offer me. So Salah ad-Din, he didn't want any Muslim to die, any Muslim to be killed. and he didn't want the masjid and the place and the buildings to be destroyed. So he offered the terms. He accepted to make a deal, and the deal was that they would allow the Christians, the Crusaders, to leave Jerusalem, but on condition that they pay a ransom, and they pay money for each person who leaves. So they managed to gather some money and to buy the freedom, and not all of them, but most of them managed to leave, and they went to northern, which is present day like Lebanon and that kind of area. So they all went there because that still was under Crusade rule. But they surrendered Jerusalem, and Salah ad-Din entered in Jerusalem in the year 1187. How long had the Jerusalem been in the hands of the Crusades? Those of you who, first of all, you have to remember, when did the Crusades take over? And then you have to have 1099. 1187. Yes, so 88 years. So 88 years the Jerusalem was under the hand of Crusades. And alhamdulillah, Salah ad-Din captured the city, and the Christians, they left, they fled, but they went to this area, and they went, if you like, they weren't happy obviously that they have to leave, so they were there, and they went there to start reinforcing to try combat attack again, but they never really managed to gain the right opportunity, if you like. They kept starting, there was lots of attacks between the Muslims, Salah ad-Din, and also, but they never got the right opportunity to seize Jerusalem again. So Jerusalem never fell to the Crusaders again. Okay? Now during this time, Salah ad-Din was, throughout his time, he wasn't, he wasn't just getting an easy life, if you like. There was, how the Fatimids had conspired against him, but he was also conspired against by another group of Shia, which was called the Ismaili. They're a different sect of Shia. And they had a sub-sect which was known as Al-Hashashin. Al-Hashashin. And these people weren't happy that Salah ad-Din had destroyed or had ended the Fatimi Khilafah. So they sent people to try and assassinate him. And there was a few assassination attempts on the life of Salah ad-Din. One of them is almost like from a movie, like somebody entered his tent and he managed to, got a knife, but Salah ad-Din caught his hand, and it was like a struggle and things like that. So alhamdulillah, Allah protected him, but these Hashashin are, which may be an information that you didn't know before, but Hashashin is actually the origination of the word assassin. They are assassinated because Hashash, assas. So they could say assassin, the assassins. So that's where we get the word assassinate from, because that was their role, if you like. They were trying to send people trying to assassinate the Sunni leaders to try and get their own back. So anyway, the point being, going back, Salah ad-Din, alhamdulillah, he opened Masjid al-Aqsa, and one of the first things that he did was he brought the mimbar. The mimbar? So it's like these stairs. Muslims we have these stairs which go. We don't have over here. You don't have the mimbar. We have these big stairs. In you see some of the like mosques, especially like Egypt, and they have these big stairs. Maybe like, I don't know, 20 or 30 stairs the Imam goes up. So this mimbar had been built by Nur ad-Din Zenki before he died, obviously. He built a mimbar which he said, this mimbar is for Masjid al-Aqsa. So even at the time of Nur ad-Din Zenki, when the Crusaders were still in control of Jerusalem, he had built a mimbar in preparation for when they would take back al-Masjid al-Aqsa. So Salah ad-Din, if you like, fulfilling this wish of Nur ad-Din, he brought that mimbar all the way from Mosul, and they brought it into al-Masjid al-Aqsa to put it there as a symbol that they had retaken back the city. So what happened after that is, a lot of historical details. Of course, Salah ad-Din, he was unfortunate to die on his bed. The great military leaders, they don't like to die on their bed. They want to die in battle. But this is what happens sometimes. And who was the other famous military leader in Islam who died on his bed, even though he wanted to die in battle? I mean, one of them. Huh? No. Yeah, but Abu Bakr did die on his bed, you're right. But Abu Bakr wasn't, when he became the Khalifa, he wasn't out fighting, if you like. Nor was Umar radiallahu anh. Huh? Yeah, who's saying Khalid? Yes, Khalid ibn al-Walid. Remember, Khalid ibn al-Walid fought so many battles, isn't it? But he never died in battle. He died on his bed. And he said a famous saying. Which was that there is no part in my body which either has an injury from a sword or from a spear or from an arrow. And every part of my body is injured. But now I am dying on my bed like a camel dies. So may the eyes of those who are cowards not go to sleep. And he wished to had died on a battle, but he was. And some of the ulama say that the reason why Khalid ibn Walid didn't die in battle was because he had the famous title of being what? What was the title of Khalid, which was given to him by the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam? The sword of Allah, Sayfullah. Sayfullah. So he was Sayfullah. And the ulama said it is not befitting for the Sayfullah, for the sword of Allah to be broken in battle. So if he had been killed in battle, it was like the sword of Allah was. And something similar about Salah ad-Din, although it wasn't the Prophet ﷺ said it, but his mother, the mother of Salah ad-Din, when she was pregnant, she said, I saw a dream that inside me was the sword of Allah. Inside me, I saw a dream that there was a sword of Allah. And that's a dream. And sometimes, the dream is, as the Prophet ﷺ said, the dream is bushra al-Muslim. Yani, it is good tidings that Allah gives to a Muslim. So anyway, Salah ad-Din died on his bed. And he was buried in Damascus. Okay, in the Masjid al-Amawi, the Umayyad Masjid. And he's buried there till this day. So much so that when the French colonized Syria, the French commander at the time, I can't remember his name, he came to the grave of Salah ad-Din. And he kicked on the grave and he said, we have come back again. SubhanAllah, see that? And so that is still in the minds of yes, because Salah ad-Din is famous. And he's famous not just in the minds of the Muslims, but even the non-Muslims. He was very, he had his nobility. And you see all those, what the Christians did, unfortunately, a lot of them were breaking their truces, breaking their promises. They were killing, they were massacring. When they took over Jerusalem, there was a bloodshed to the extent that they said that the blood reached the knees of the people who were slaughtering, and they slaughtered so many people in taking over Jerusalem. And so there was the anger, there was the hatred. But when Salah ad-Din defeated him, he didn't have that hatred. They weren't fighting to spill blood or to kill people. There was bigger things to stay. So, and they had that nobility, they had that goodness. After this, Salah ad-Din, he left behind him some children, and they ruled. I mean, these are all extra historical details, if you like. But the Ayyubid rule continued for a while. The Zengi rule continued for a while, until which major catastrophe fell on the Muslims? What was the next major catastrophe to fall on the Muslims? Apart from the Crusades. The Crusades were coming from the west, this time from the east. You all know this. Don't be shy. The Mongols, Al-Maghul, or At-Tatar. The Mongols, they were the next major catastrophe to befall on the Muslims, and it was until they came back in the year 12, the 13th century, 1256, they came and they sacked, as they call, Baghdad, and they put an end to the Khilafah al-Abbasiyah. That was the Mongols. And they put an end to the rule of the Zengis and so on. The Ayyubid rule, which was focused in Syria and Egypt, it was overtaken by another set of rulers who were known as Al-Mamalik. And that's a whole different story. Because now Al-Mamalik, they had to face the new enemy, which was the Mongols. And that's inshallah for a different day, another history lesson inshallah ta'ala. So what are the key points that we've learned today? Who is the leader that is ranked amongst the Khulafa al-Rashidin after Umar ibn Abdul Aziz? Nuruddin Zenki. Yeah. Where was he based? Which city? Mosul. What was the famous leader, the name of the famous leader that he sent to Egypt? Shirko. Why was Shirko sent to Egypt? To help the Fatimids against the Crusaders, okay? And then who was it that put an end to the Fatimid rule? In Salah ad-Din. How many years did the Fatimids rule? How many years did the Fatimid dynasty exist? 250 years. Surprisingly today, Egypt, there's no Shia in Egypt, and there's no Shia sect in Egypt. Obviously there is in Iraq, there's Kuwait, there is Bahrain, Syria, Lebanon, there's all. But Egypt, even though the Fatimids ruled for 250 years, there's no, if you like, any Shia left. Although maybe now there is some arising again due to change in their beliefs. So 250 years. What was the battle in which Salah ad-Din defeated the Crusades? What was the famous battle called? I mentioned the plains of Hittin. When did Hittin take place? I didn't mention this. Which month did it take place in? Ramadan. One of the famous battles of Ramadan. And this was an indication that the Muslims weren't lazy in Ramadan. They didn't use Ramadan as an excuse. Today we use Ramadan as an excuse not to get out of bed. Oh, I'm fasting, I can't, no energy. No. They were fighting battles and defeating their enemies. How many years was Jerusalem under the Crusade rule? 88 years. And I think that's enough questions for you. Does anybody have any questions that they would like to ask? Hittin. So Hittin is in the plains, which is in current day Palestine and Palestine. So it's not far from Jerusalem, and I think it's south east. Yeah. Any other questions? How many years? It was around 150 years. Yeah, around 150 years. Huh? When was it built? So Hagia Sophia was, it was, huh? Yeah, so the Romans built it, the Byzantine Romans in Constantinople, And I think it was built around the 4th or 5th century after Jesus. So it's very old. At the time of Constantinople, Constantinople is named after the ruler called Constantine. And he was the one who changed Christianity, because he, for about 300 years, Christians, they didn't believe that Jesus was God. They believed Jesus was a prophet. But it was this guy Constantine, in a famous meeting, was known as the Treaty of Nicaea. He brought all the Christian priests and everything, and they had a meeting in 325 AD. And this was when the Romans, they embraced Christianity, but they wanted Christian to become a pagan religion. So they mixed paganism, shirk and wathaniya, with Christianity. And that's why they started to make Jesus into a god, into a son of God. They made all the celebrations of paganism into Christianity. So Christmas is nothing to do with the birth of Jesus. It was to do with the birth of the Son God. And Easter was related to, again, also the birth of Easter. These are all pagan religions, but they incorporated it into Christianity to allow the message. And they destroyed the real Christians. See, that's why the Quran doesn't call the Christians. What does the Quran call the Christians? Huh? No. Nasara. And Nasara, what is a Nasara? Who are the Nasara? Why are they called Nasara? Because they are from Nasira. And Nasira is Nazareth in English. Jesus of Nazareth. That was his city, and Nasira. So those who followed Jesus were known as Nasara. The Nasara, the true followers of Jesus, they were Jews. So they practiced everything that Jews were practicing. And one of the things that the Jews practice, which is like Muslims, is what? Huh? Al-Khitan, yes. The circumcision. Circumcision. And even when the new Christians, with these new Christians who wanted to change the religion of Jesus, they were making fun of those followers of Jesus. They were saying, you are the circumcised lot. So it's like, we don't need to be circumcised. You know, Christianity is not about being circumcised. You don't have to follow the rules. And the main thing is you believe that Jesus died on the cross. So anyway, what I'm saying to you is that the early Christians and Nasara, those were the ones who were following Isa alayhi salam. Those who came later after Constantine and changed the religion, they are known today as Al-Masihiyin, but they're not Masih. They're not the followers of Masih. You see, because there's no real religion of Masih. Masih alayhi salam was a follower of Judaism. He was a follower of the religion of Musa alayhi salam. And even if you think about it, in a hadith, there is a hadith, the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam said that عُرِضَتْ عَلَيَّ الْأُمَمْ, I saw the nations on the day of judgment. عُرِضَتْ عَلَيَّ الْأُمَمْ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ فَرَأَيْتُ النَّبِيِّ وَمَعَهُ عَشْرَةُ أَتْبَاعٍ وَمَعَهُ الرَّهْطِ. I saw a prophet, and he would have like a few people, his followers with him, 10 people. And one prophet would have 1 or 2 followers. And there will be prophets with no followers. Nobody believed in them. They just came as one prophet. And then I looked to the horizon and I saw a large crowd of people. No. And so I said, who is this? It was said to me, this is Musa and his followers. And then, but then, I think it was the angel who said to him, he said, but look to the other side. So he said, I looked to the other side, and there was much more people who had filled the horizon. And it was said, this is your followers. This is the ummah of Muhammad. Now in this hadith, surprisingly, It doesn't mention Isa alayhi salam. Doesn't say this is the Isa and his followers. Do you see? Why? Because the true followers of Isa are not the Christians today. They are not the followers of Isa. Because Isa never said, I am God and I am the Son of God and these are the followers of somebody who came after Isa and changed his religion, namely somebody called Paul, and then later adapted by Constantine. So the followers of Christianity today are not the followers of Isa. And that's why in the hadith he didn't say, I saw Isa and with him all the followers. Because whereas he said with Musa, I saw Musa and his followers. So because the Jews, they are the followers of Musa today. But the Christians today, they are not the followers of Isa alayhi salam.
What about
Hawariyyin are the disciples, meaning they were the close people to Isa alayhi salam. And they say they were 12 in number, 12 Hawariyyin. But Hawariyyin basically they were the supporters of Isa alayhi salam. Okay, we've gone off the topic. We've gone into Christianity. But inshallah we will talk about Constantinople. I don't know if it's our next lecture. Is our next lecture on the Uthmani? You don't have the period. Okay, but our next lecture on history inshallah will be 1 month's time.
Spain was under the rule of Muslims.
The Spain, we spoke about it last month. Last month we had the lecture about Al-Andalus, which you missed. But what you can do, is it on YouTube? It's on YouTube, inshallah.
And what about Fatimid in Egypt? At that time they ruled in Libya, Tunisia,
Yes.
and then that the people in Libya and Egypt, they was Shia or Sunni.
Well, a lot of them followed the religion of Shia as a madhab. But there were people as well who were Sunnis as well, because the Fatimids, they took over from, that area was all Sunni before. It was all Sunni because before, who opened Egypt? Who was the governor of Egypt at the time of the Sahaba? Amr ibn al-As. So the Sahaba, they opened Egypt, and Egypt was there under the rules of the Khulafa, and then the Umayyads, and then the Abbasiyin. But later it fell to the Fatimids. So the people were still Sunni. There were Shia as well, but the Khulafa in charge were the Shia elite. من؟ ما أعرف، لا أعرفه. I don't know that name. Sorry. Yes.
How did Indonesia become Muslim?
Okay, that's another topic. But as far as I know, because I haven't studied that, but Indonesia, they say that due to the Yemenis, that they were going and trading with the Far East. So they went to trade, and with the trade they took the da'wah. This is why I've heard, but I haven't studied that in detail. Yes. Okay, let's end there inshallah, because salah is in a few minutes. Jazakumullah khair. Subhanaka Allahumma wa bihamdika, nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk.